Matthew, everyday audiophile, music lover, cerveza enthusiast. Now, as you can guess, this one is not from the United States. This was actually a beer picked up from Honduras by my parents. They just went on a cruise, and we're going to give it a shot. This is the Salva Vida. Probably butchered that. I do apologize. And it says that it's since 1916, so they've been brewing this for a good number of years, over a century. And of course, when you have a lager, you are going to put it in a lager glass. Now, I do expect this to only be 4 to 5%, and that's pretty perfect because I did spend the day at a brewery with the family, and so having a lighter beer is going to be nice. And yeah, that's a lager. It's not bad. That's the only can I have. I do wish I had a little bit more. It would be pretty good during the summer, I bet. But that's not what we're here for. Let's talk about AudioLinux and Diretta. So it's been a minute, and before we get started on the review officially, I feel like it's necessary to talk about the conclusions from the last video. Specifically, the AudioLinux versus Gentooplayer comparison. Where did that land? Essentially, at the end of the day, AudioLinux provided me a greater level of detail. Now, these are very small differences, but something that I could consistently reproduce between Gentooplayer and AudioLinux going through the Holo Audio Red. There was more detail, a slightly deeper backdrop in that background, so that's where those micro details came out of. Where Gentooplayer instead excelled at was soundstage. It was a bit more expansive left to right and front to back. So you really got to choose which one was more important for you. Was it a little bit more soundstage and to me just a little bit more musicality? Or were you looking for the deeper insight into those micro details? I think that was a really interesting comparison, and it's something that has still held true to me throughout the many weeks, perhaps months, of testing the Diretta implementation of both. That does bring me to the next topic, which is, what does the system look at right now? So this is really just to provide a point of reference on what my system is currently, because it has changed since the last review of AudioLinux. So on the speaker side, I am using the Rosso Fiorentino Certaldo 2s. They are not quite as detailed as the Pure Art-Fi LS6s, but they do have a bit more airiness about them because of that soft dome tweeter, and they are just so musical to listen to, and they provide just as much depth to the soundstage as the LS6s. They really are a wonderful speaker through and through. The only thing that they're really losing out on is that bass slam. There's only so much you can do with a 5¼ inch driver compared to the Purify 6½ inch. Driving those is the Norma IPA 80 integrated amplifier. So this is what I've been listening to for the last few weeks, and I do hope to get a video on it pretty soon. We're going to ignore the analog side since we're talking about digital purely in this video. For the DAC, I'm using the Live Harmony DAC. I did use the audio for a bit, but the Live is more detailed, and so it is able to give me a little bit more insight into the differences between the two streamers. So that's why I've been focusing on that DAC. And then obviously on the streaming side, I have a Holo Audio Red that is the Diretta target, and then just a Raspberry Pi 4B that is the Diretta host. So the very first thing that I wanted to look into, as far as Diretta was concerned, was looking at what changed when I went from just AudioLinux to AudioLinux Diretta. So both the host and the target are using AudioLinux. And I gotta say, I was a bit surprised. I'm going into this thinking there shouldn't be any differences, but I'm hearing differences, and it's a little bit infuriating. So when I hooked up both the target and the host in AudioLinux using Diretta between the two, I was a bit surprised that what I heard sounded nearly identical to what I was getting out of Gentooplayer for both the target and the host. And really, I had to switch back and forth between AudioLinux and Gentooplayer for both. This is what really made it take so long, a couple months to really wrap my mind around what I was hearing. But at the end of the day, the strengths of Diretta caused the minute differences that I was hearing between Gentooplayer and AudioLinux to disappear. That is to say that I really couldn't tell a difference at the end of the day. And I think that's a bit of a good thing that speaks to the strengths of the Diretta implementation, that it's removing any small differences that there could be between Gentooplayer and AudioLinux and perhaps any other implementation. But let's talk about the specifics really quick and what I heard. So going back to the previous video with AudioLinux versus Gentooplayer, the two tracks that I bring up are Liberty by Annette Askvik and Equinox by Gilak Hexelman. These two are both recorded extraordinarily well. One of them is mastered way better than the other, but they both serve to provide me everything that I need to test the soundstage of a system. One of them, Liberty, is just so well done that you get little bits and pieces throughout the soundstage, and it makes it really easy to feel the size of a room from just that single track. Whereas Equinox gives you that live recording and that live space, so you can hear the sound bouncing off of the walls, you can hear the crowd in the background. And these two tracks combined have definitively become my reference for giving me that sense of soundstage in a system. And really, with AudioLinux using Diretta, that already black soundstage that I was hearing, it just went even further down. And all of those micro details that I was hearing just became even more present. And that is exactly what happened when I used it with Gentooplayer, except the benefit was even greater because Gentooplayer already by itself didn't have quite the noise floor. So because of that drop in the noise floor, inherently you get to hear a little bit more of where things are in the room. And so using Diretta with AudioLinux caused that soundstage to come back out a little bit and match what I was getting with Gentooplayer. Again, I want to note that these differences are so small that it is just personal preference and perhaps me just thinking I'm hearing things. But these are things that I could consistently hear between the two. It's why I tend to focus on soundstage versus frequency response or the leading edge of a note. Those things are a little bit harder for me, myself, and my ears to reliably hear again and again and again when I'm switching between components. So with that out of the way, that being Gentooplayer and AudioLinux and Diretta sound exactly the same to me. There's no difference. The next step was cross-breeding, so to speak. How would it sound with a Gentooplayer host and an AudioLinux target, or flipped around the other way? And this, in my opinion, is where the magic is with these two distributions. I'm going to go ahead and go out of the way and say a Gentooplayer host with an AudioLinux target did not make a lick of difference to me. That is, it sounded the exact same as a pure Gentooplayer Diretta implementation or a pure AudioLinux Diretta implementation. So these are three different configurations that to my ear, best as I try, I could not tell the difference. And this was on both speakers and using the Stax headphones that I reviewed a few videos ago. Joe, he still hasn't picked up those headphones, so of course I'm going to use them and try to extract as much information as I can out of these setups. But yes, those three, I couldn't tell the difference. I wanted to be able to tell the difference, and I guess you could call that confirmation bias, but I couldn't. And so the last one to try was AudioLinux host and Gentooplayer target. And I gotta say, that is where it's at. You can probably tell I'm a bit excited about this. It's mostly because I was just so shocked that the difference was so obvious. All of the benefits that I got from AudioLinux and all of the benefits that I got from Gentooplayer, imagine both of those combined with the benefits of Diretta. So I got, again, a bigger soundstage. I got, again, a bigger soundstage depth, so width and depth both increasing. And I thought these speakers already had a black background with Diretta, but somehow it managed to drop it a little bit further. And it wasn't that I could start hearing more of the micro details. It was just that those micro details, like the sounds around Annette's voice in Liberty as she's singing, you can hear voices in the background over here or a little bell over here. Let's take in the first 60 seconds. Those just became a little bit more pronounced. And not only were they more pronounced, but they had a little bit more echo around them, as if they were even further back in the room. So you did get that sense that the room was bigger, in addition to just hearing those little details a little bit better. And to me, that was unbelievable. So right now, yeah, I'm running an AudioLinux host with a Gentooplayer target, and the difference is excellent. But let's theorize for a sec why this might be the case. I've done a lot of research into what makes AudioLinux better and what makes Gentooplayer better. And I think I've nailed down why. AudioLinux is much better optimized. And this kind of shows itself in it has a much faster boot time than Gentooplayer. So the host does a lot of the heavy lifting when you look at the Diretta setup. The target is meant to be as low power as possible. All it does is take the regular interval of music coming through Ethernet via that Diretta protocol and just pass it along to the DAC. And it does this because all of that heavy lifting of, instead of sending packets, larger packets that are further apart, it sends smaller packets at regular intervals. That is all the host that's doing that work. It's the host that's running Rune Bridge or Spotify Connect or Qobuz Connect, Tidal Connect, whatever it is that you need. So having a more optimized operating system on the host, I think, makes a sizable difference in this case with Diretta. Where Gentooplayer really shines is that it can be run, or is run, in memory, and that is part of the reason why it takes so long to load. It's a smaller kernel size, and so running it in memory is entirely feasible. So that way you don't have to deal with the noise of the SD card when you're just playing back music. And I think these two benefits, so a host that's highly optimized and is really good at the heavy lifting, and a target that runs in memory where it is inherently less noisy, I think these two things combined provide you the right balance, or at least provided me the right balance of performance, quietness, soundstage, and so forth. And I am happy to say there were no issues in AudioLinux and Gentooplayer talking with each other, because it is just through that Diretta protocol. They don't know about each other except through the packets that are being sent. So no issues there. I will say that Diretta configuration for me is a little bit easier on Gentooplayer because of the web UI. With AudioLinux, I have to SSH into it, and for a lot of people that may be less easy to do. That's just the way I'm going to put it. But yeah, that is where I landed on this Diretta AudioLinux versus Gentooplayer. I'm currently using both, and I'm loving the way that it sounds so far. I've had zero issues. It's been working since the day that I set it up. And really that leads me into what's next. Based on comments on previous videos, Euphony OS is the next thing to look at. And that's going to be the next thing on the docket. So after I get the rest of the holidays out of the way and my planned videos for January, I'm going to start listening to Euphony OS, and I'm going to let you know my thoughts on it. But until then, I hope that y'all have a great rest of your week, and I will see y'all later. Cheers.